Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering Trump. Trump cancels woke nonprofits, causes layoffs, shutdowns, and firings. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Cutting off the funding for USAID and other federal groups has caused nonprofits to somehow not be able to fund themselves anymore. We have absolutely no idea what we've been funding throughout the federal government, but it looks like every nonprofit gets some kind of money from the federal government, but not so much anymore. And despite judges interfering and trying to lock down federal funds and take control of the Treasury, still, many of these groups can't afford to exist anymore. Coming from Politico, catastrophic layoffs hit foreign aid groups amid Trump funding freeze. And from Breitbart, Catholic Relief Services cut staff, migration efforts as U.S. aid scandal grows. Because as much as we've been having an issue with illegal immigration in this country, especially over the last 4 years, we've been financing all of that through leftist nonprofits that take the money and actually bring people into the country illegally. And from DevEx, exclusive, up to 3,000 DC aid workers laid off by next week, according to the CEO. TT Global CEO told staff members many other firms could furlough or retrench the vast majority of their staff. It's not just the 10,000 USAID workers getting laid off. It's all of the money that those workers were providing to these nonprofits to push a progressive agenda that the United States does not want, also getting cut off, laid off, shut down, closed down. Coming from Politico, catastrophic layoffs hit foreign aid groups amid Trump funding freeze. Thousands of U.S. workers in the foreign development field are being furloughed or laid off as the industry coffers run dry. The Trump administration's halt on foreign aid is starting to hollow out international development groups and private federal contractors that carry out aid missions abroad, and threatens to cause long-lasting damage to U.S. engagement around the world. That's the kind of damage we could live with. Last month, the State Department ordered an immediate pause on U.S. foreign aid for 90 days and issued stop work orders on nearly all existing foreign assistance awards. This swift decision has effectively left many government contractors and global aid providers, including groups that supply HIV and AIDS care, provide child health services, set up education programs, fight food insecurity, and counter disinformation in developing nations, that is, financing media and propaganda efforts, and now they're struggling to operate or pay their workers. 8 U.S.-based individuals who work in the foreign aid sector, all granted anonymity due to concerns about retaliation from the administration, told Politico that the foreign aid freeze had undermined their ability to carry out global aid efforts. Some predict that thousands of foreign aid professionals across the industry may soon be out of work. Quote, I can't even begin to describe how cataclysmic it is. Everyone is furloughing or laying off staff, said one person. It's almost 5,000 people, and it's just starting. I've read where some 30,000 people in the country of Jordan no longer have jobs because we're not sending the money out through USAID to keep those people employed. So they all have to go. And that's just one example. The U.S. is the largest provider of humanitarian assistance globally, deploying billions of dollars through multiple agencies, including U.S. Agency for International Development. The majority of USAID's funds are awarded competitively through contracts, grants, or cooperative agreements with international development groups and private federal contractors. These organizations often pay out of pocket to support their missions abroad and are reimbursed by the federal government. But a break in federal funding for these critical programs has left many organizations in crisis mode. Now, if it's true that these organizations pay out of pocket to support their missions and then are comfortably sitting around waiting to get reimbursed by the federal government money that they know is going to come in, that means they are a very high margin business. You can't lay cash out of pocket and then just wait to get recouped. Even if it's 30 days, you'd have to float and cover all of that money in all of that time. And you can do that, but only if you have a very high profit margin. In some cases, that may not be the case. But if it's industry standard, then the industry has been making an absolute fortune off of these grants. It's Business 101. It may take months or years for some of these federal contractors and NGOs to recover, while others do not have enough funding to survive the 90-day freeze. But we're currently looking at the possibility of many hundreds of seasoned professionals in the humanitarian and development and human rights field going completely out of business, said a senior executive for an aid group. One person who spoke to Politico said that their group had not received federal funding for more than a month. Another individual said they expected multiple non-government organizations to declare bankruptcy this week. A third blamed what they said was the 30-day world of development, where the organizations are paid out by the federal government month to month. If that lapses, funds run out fast, making the situation urgent. Quote, every company has lost so much now as a result of offering these furloughs, one person who works in the industry said. Even if they start back up, say 2 months from now, there are likely going to be very few implementations. They will have no more staff. Another person who works for a USAID contractor said that looking at their projects and budgets, there was no way to sustain themselves for even a fraction of the 90-day period. Quote, it's not a pause if there's no pieces to be picked up when you want to resume. It would be like pausing feeding your dog for 90 days. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has issued a waiver allowing, quote, life-saving humanitarian assistance to continue, though the definition of that assistance remains vague. One person who spoke with Politico said the funds from that waiver program had not yet begun to flow, and that the stop work order was still in place. A State Department spokesperson said via email that some salaries and administrative expenses, including travel for U.S. direct hire staff conducting ongoing programs, will be allowed to continue under waivers. Quote, staff have been given a template for waiver requests, the spokesperson said. The spokesperson underlined the purpose of the aid freeze was to ensure it's aligned with the America First foreign policy agenda. Quote, for far too long, the United States foreign aid industry and bureaucracy have not been aligned with American interests, and in many cases antithetical to American values. They serve to destabilize world peace by promoting ideas in foreign countries that are directly inverse to harmonious and stable relations internal to and among countries. A State Department official clarified in a memo which parts of the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, which delivers HIV treatment for millions of people, mostly in Africa, were covered. But Senator Bill Cassidy, the chair of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, wrote on Twitter that he was told, quote, drugs are still being held at clinics in Africa. This crisis is likely to intensify as the Trump administration makes moves to fold USAID into the State Department, which could further complicate how funding for these groups is decided and distributed. Some influential Republicans support the idea of folding USAID into the State Department and welcome a mass restructuring across the industry. Representative Brian Mast, who chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee, told CBS Face the Nation that he wasn't concerned about the layoffs, quote, because of the grift that has been working onto the American taxpayer, the American worker. Mast said that only between 10 and 30% of the money USAID handled was ultimately going to aid, and that he's working with Rubio to make sure there's an appropriate command and control of these agencies. Researchers dispute the claim that such a low percentage of USAID funding reaches its intended beneficiaries. Some of these anticipated layoffs have already begun. According to an email obtained by Politico, early last week, development group Credence Management Solutions sent formal emails to contractors in its Global Health Bureau, laying off around 400 employees. A director at a leading USAID contractor who spoke with Politico said that more than two-thirds of their company would be furloughed by the end of the week, describing the future of the sector as bleak at best. Quote, this is starting to look like an industry crash, a different person in the aid sector said. In addition to companies facing crisis, individuals who work in foreign aid in Washington say the job market is about to be oversaturated with thousands of newly unemployed people with no clear path forward. One person who spoke with Politico had been due to begin a job in the foreign aid space, but had their offer rescinded because the job no longer exists. Quote, we're all flooding the next door neighbor sectors, which can't possibly absorb us, this person said. Quote, even though we know we're each other's competitors, there is still a community that I hope we'll maintain. In an interview for the Megyn Kelly Show, Rubio said that the aid pause was meant to provide the federal government with time to review existing contracts. He noted that the funds should, quote, be a tool that we use to advance the national interest, and asserted that the U.S. government is not a charity. One individual who'd worked in the foreign aid space through multiple administrations stressed that while it was typical for there to be a review of contracts at the start of a new administration, the blunt approach the Trump administration is taking goes well beyond what has been done in previous years. Quote, each administration has their own priorities. They take a pause, they reflect, they review, they adjust, the person said. What is damaging is the fact that it was so abrupt and unequivocal. Quote, it's very challenging to have a reform conversation when you're in the middle of shutting everything down, another person added. That's absolutely correct. And that's the whole point. The groups affected are those across the spectrum, including the International Republican Institute, which counts Republican senators on its board and carries out pro-democracy work abroad. IRI President Daniel Twining said in a statement to Politico that he believes a review of foreign aid funding is quite in order, but that we can only hope that the review happens expeditiously because our adversaries aren't pausing, and they would relish in seeing foreign assistance go away. As the U.S. waffles on foreign assistance, other nations may be waiting to fill the voids created. Specifically, the Chinese government has pursued its Belt and Road Initiative for the past decade to build infrastructure in developing nations around the world, particularly in Latin America and Africa, and exert political influence. Some lawmakers are also particularly worried about this prospect. The top Democrats on the House and Senate committees with oversight of the State Department and of USAID on Friday sent a letter to the agency making clear their strong concerns around the funding pause. Quote, not only will lives be lost, but we'll also be ceding ground to China, damaging our standing in the world. At a time of heightened geopolitical competition, the lawmakers wrote. Senator Chris Murphy, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, tweeted Saturday that China will fill the void in developing nations, which will only be able to rely on China for help. Beyond giving Beijing and other adversarial nations an opening, the funding freeze also risks undermining the U.S.'s standing around the world as a reliable development partner. The withdrawal of U.S. funding, often a key way that the nation builds trust and relationships abroad, could knock the nation's public diplomacy efforts. In some cases, this involves direct assistance to other governments, helping to secure the U.S. by maintaining allies in times of peace. That method looks set to disappear. Quote, we've spent more than 50 years building up goodwill around the world because it's the right thing to do, and it protects our national security, a person in the foreign aid sector said. It costs a whole lot less to feed someone than it does to kill someone. And from Breitbart, Catholic Relief Service has cut staff migration efforts as USAID scandal grows. Catholic Relief Services is preparing for massive cuts after President Donald Trump slashed the federal government's funding for mass migration into Americans' communities. CRS is one of the biggest recipients of USAID's funding, but with the Trump spending freeze, the charity is quickly moving to scale back its organization, lay off employees, and retool, according to the National Catholic Reporter. Some layoffs have already taken place, and insiders say the organization may reduce by as much as 50% this year. Quote, we anticipate that we will be a much smaller overall organization by the end of this fiscal year, according to CRS President and CEO Sean Callahan, who told staffers this in an email. Callahan added that some of its planned programs have already been canceled. The organization was founded in 1943 by a gathering of Catholic bishops in the U.S. to respond to refugees escaping the devastation of World War II in Europe. It claims to serve 200 million people across 121 countries today. Stephen Colecci, a former director of the Office of International Justice and Peace for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, blasted the cuts and said that targeting the tiny portion of federal dollars USAID gives out is a haphazard and irresponsible way to save money. Quote, it's not a thoughtful or humane way to go about treating programs that help the poorest of the poor all over the world, he added. That tiny portion, as he calls it, amounts to $4.6 billion in U.S. tax dollars between 2013 and 2022, according to the magazine. Sure, but part of the problem is that is actual money that we may or may not want to spend. Beyond that, these people are running a migration operation, bringing people into the United States illegally, which then the United States has to pay all the costs for. That's a big problem. CRS is not the only faith-based charitable organization preparing to downsize in the face of USAID cost-cutting. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society is also laying off staffers and scaling back in light of President Trump's cost-cutting, and by as much as 20%, according to Forward. However, they can't lay all of its cost cutting at Donald Trump's feet because much of its woes come from severe mismanagement that recently came to light. In a separate article, Forward notes that an accounting error revealed that their organization had engaged in unsustainable spending. The magazine went on to note that Chief Financial Officer Lara Moninghoff has left her position after a review discovered that she overspent due to a combination of technology transition and human error that our internal controls failed to identify. Company officer Beth Oppenheim insists that Moninghoff did not commit any crime and added that, quote, there was no mismanagement of donor funds, and we remain a responsible steward of donor funding around the world. Yeah, I still don't want to give them any money. The organization's chief work recently has focused on shuffling an increasing number of migrants into the USA, but not without controversy. Last year, it found itself accused of supplying maps to migrants in South and Central America, as well as Mexico, to show illegal aliens how to get to the US border. But with the Trump administration's freeze on new migrants, they're now seriously constrained from what it had been doing under the Biden administration. Their organization received at least $500 million in U.S. funds during the Biden administration for its migrant importation efforts. But an internal investigation into spending also discovered that the charity did not properly vet the outside organizations it was passing federal money to. Now they say that corrective actions are being taken to ensure that partnering organizations are in compliance with federal regulations. The group is still going ahead with bringing migrants into the U.S. and has sought private funding for the 67 refugees it was welcoming into Chicago this month after the Trump administration froze $363,000 in funding, according to the Detroit Jewish News. The nonprofit sector will never be the same after these freezes. The layoffs, the job cuts, the shutdowns is going to eliminate a lot of people that were doing things, as Marco Rubio said, that were the opposite of what this country wants. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you. And if you want to support the channel and help me make even more videos, subscribe to the channel and become a paid member today.